Hi guys, Aramithius here with a quick note just before we kick off. Well, unfortunately, we've continued to be plagued with audio problems while we recorded this episode. Unfortunately, this time around, Rel's audio is a little rougher than I would like. I've tried to neaten it up, but I still appreciate that it'll be a little bit rough listening, so I just apologise for that, and I hope you guys can bear with us until next time when we will have all of the audio issues sorted out and a much better quality audio at the end of it. Sorry again, and we hope you enjoy the show. Welcome to the Wondrous Atlas of Creation's Destiny podcast, your guide to all places and plots exalted. My name is Aramithius.
And I'm Rails.
And this episode, we are talking about all things dragon-blooded. But before we get to the meat of that, can I say that wherever you're listening, if you like what we're doing, please do leave us a review. I know that both Apple Podcasts and Spotify and Stitcher, somewhere in the bowels of its programming, runs a review platform, so please do leave us reviews. Let us know what you think. Good, bad, or ugly. We will try to improve or bask in your praises, whichever is most appropriate. And if you have anything else that you want to make sure absolutely gets to us, please do drop us an email at wondrousatlas@gmail.com, and we will absolutely get back to you. Now I think we should probably get to the Dragon-Blooded. So, a rough outline of what the Dragon-Blooded are to start with. They are the chosen of the elemental dragons, which is to say they are the chosen of 5 spirits that are aspected to the various elemental poles of the exalted world of creation. They are the elemental dragons of air, earth, fire, and water.
This also is interesting for them in that it makes Dragonbloods, despite how we do tend to categorize exalts as celestial or terrestrial, a Dragonblood is basically a second-order primordial exalted, given what the dragons actually are.
Yes. I don't know whether that's ever been totally clarified. I see some stuff around saying that they are the children of Gaia, who is one of the primordials who sided with the gods in the Divine Revolution, was one of only 2 to do so, but she is also the physical place of creation itself. The reason that Dragon-Blooded are called terrestrial exalted is because they are the chosen of the world in some sense.
Yeah, and the official line, at least in the older editions, I think Third also hints at it, but Third doesn't like saying the word primordial. The official line is basically that when all of the gods and the 2 primordials that they had were exalting people to go and stab all the other primordials, Gaia tried it, and the human body could not take the full unadulterated power of a primordial. So she split her power into 5, which is why I tend to treat them as...
Oh.
Yeah, because it is the whole thing of the dragons. We don't know if the dragons were made specifically for this, or if she just decided to let the dragons do it instead of her because of this, but it is a case of, like, a single Dragonblood doesn't get the whole full juice of Gaia and become Aang off of Avatar.
Which is, well, we'll get to that. Thematically, absolutely, they do have one aspect that they're keyed to, but the system kind of goes a little bit against that. But again, we'll get to that. So you can, in theory, if you like, do kind of Avatar-like effects with a Dragon-Blooded. I mean, that's probably the closest comparison, the idea of elemental benders for the Dragon-Blooded, although Dragon-Blooded don't just interact with their chosen element.
Equally, it's not guaranteed that they get manipulation. That's the big misconception that a lot of people think is like, oh yeah, I will make myself a fire-aspected Dragonblood so I can have flamethrower hands. That's not guaranteed. You do have to build for that.
Yep. There's an awful lot of the more metaphysical aspects, or metaphorical aspects of the elements. So your earth aspects are your kind of stoic, stubborn, immovable things, whereas fire is passion and verve and always wanting to do stuff. If you've got a fire aspected artist, that makes total sense, and things like that. I mean, we'll get to the full nature of the aspect in a bit, but I just wanted to name check the dragons before we go any further.
Because they do have wonderful names.
They do. I like them. Mela is the dragon of air, and Pasiap is the dragon of earth. Hesiesh is the dragon of fire. Darnad is the dragon of water. If that is the wrong pronunciation, I now have it, thanks to the Onyx Pathcast, that it is absolutely fine to say them however you think they should be said.
Yeah, Darnad is a case of that most despicable trope of all fantasy writing of needless apostrophes.
Yeah, or Darnad or something.
Yeah.
Just kind of where you have to swallow your tongue.
And then finally, because this is a 5-element system, the best name of the set, the Dragon of Wood, Sextus Gilis.
Yes! These are the elemental dragons. You may also hear the term immaculate dragons bandied around. These are not them. The immaculate dragons are a construct of the immaculate faith that are said not to actually exist in any reasonable sense. They are taken... The immaculate dragons did exist at some point, and they are kind of exemplars of the various aspects of the immaculate faith, but they are not tied to the elemental dragons in any meaningful way.
Other than presumably aspect, because as I understand it, it's more likely that they were people than... The stories change constantly, but they are saint figures that just so happen to have the exact same names as the elemental ones because we want to be confusing.
Yeah, the reason that I was getting confused about whether or not they existed or not was because each immaculate dragon has an opposite, something that, if the immaculate dragons are expressions of the virtues of the immaculate faith, these opposites are the vices of the immaculate faith, and they don't have names, they just have titles and are purely figurative things to be examples of things not to do.
Yeah.
But we are getting thoroughly off track.
This will become a thing in the Immaculate episode.
Yes, absolutely. We'll unpack that a bit more in the Immaculate episode. But we should probably talk about the Dragon-Blooded Exaltation itself.
Yeah, it messy.
Generally, yes. And it's also hereditary.
Oh, yes.
Which is probably the biggest distinction between any other kind of exaltation you'll find out there. You get dragon-blooded families.
Yep.
I mean, it's not an absolute guarantee that if you are the child of a dragon-blooded, you will be a dragon-blooded yourself, but it is likely. There are different strategies that different societies of dragon-blooded seem to take to get to having more dragon-blooded in various ways.
The editions differ quite significantly over it. But I think we can cover the heredity a touch later, because that's... The other two factors of the exaltation don't invoke edition wars, whereas
that's
the
true.
last one does.
Yeah, let's back away from the edition wars. We've done that more than enough on this podcast already. But yes, the Dragon-Blooded Exaltation is a sudden manifestation of the element of the dragon that exalts the person, and it is generally quite dangerous. If someone suddenly bursts into flames in the middle of doing something, you're still in a situation, as with most exaltations, where you need to be, in theory, under some duress in order to exalt. This leads to all sorts of bizarre rituals for, particularly in the realm, but elsewhere as well, to try and put people in a precarious enough situation to make them exalt, bit where it becomes sort of a rite of passage.
Though equally, I would say the duress, compared to the solar one, where it's like the fight for your life sort of situation 9 times out of 10, the Dragonblood one isn't always going to be that severe a duress, simply because of when Dragon-Blooded Exaltation happens. Because a Dragonblood will, by and large, exalt between... And again, Edition Wars changed these numbers, but not big enough to matter. Roughly between sort of the ages of 10 and 20, 23-ish. Once you get into your mid-20s, if you haven't exalted, your family by and large considers that you're never going to. That doesn't mean you won't, It's just that the chance is tiny. It's a teenage thing. I'm saying this just because the 3rd edition Dragonblood book has, like... There are some dragon-blooded children who do exalt when fighting or other cool stuff, but then equally, there's one of them who was just freaking out for an exam that he had the next day, and boom, exalted, becoming an heir aspect, which makes you a nerd.
Yes, we'll get to that one. The other feature of the whole kind of it runs in families things means that where you get dragon-blooded, you tend to get ruling castes that are quite often, not always, but quite often impenetrable unless you have connections to a dragon-blooded somewhere.
Yeah. The realm is the most obvious one, and Prasad as a follow-through of that. Lookshy, I have opinions about how Lookshy does it, because Lookshy is actually quite clever and bucks the trend a bit, but...
Yes, we'll get to that.
It comes with nobility, just because you get... Well, there is literally a select number of families who get superpowers. That tends to lend itself to making yourself in charge.
Yes.
And equally, Dragonbloods are, and I'm surprised we haven't mentioned this yet, a lot more common than all the other ones.
Yes, the phrase that you'll see bandied about when talking about all dragon-blooded, one is the dragon-blooded host, which is just, this is an army, folks, and the other one is the phrase of 10,000 dragons under heaven. That 10,000, I get the feeling, I seem to remember that second edition tried to make that a hard number. That's just the realm.
Yeah.
And I think third, insofar as it does hard numbers, says that that's roughly half the dragon-blooded in creation. Yeah. So you have 10,000 dragon-blooded serving the realm and 10,000 scattered in various places throughout the rest of the world.
Which, again, given population numbers, when we say they're the most common type of exalt, that still doesn't mean they are common in a general sense.
No, that's very true, because the map of creation is bigger than the world.
And population numbers get absolutely comedic, because most of creation, aside from like the far north and the far south, tends to have population density reminiscent of China at its peak.
Yes, which means that, yes, the dragon-blooded are still relatively rare, although because of how the dragon-blooded societies work, you will get clusters of them, which means that actually running the games where you actually have more than one of these things appear in a blue moon is actually quite easy.
Yeah, and because it's familial as well. And I know we're going to contradict this later, but you're less likely to see a random country bumpkin dragon out in the middle of nowhere. They will tend to arise where the civilization is, because that's where their families will be.
Yes, generally speaking. And once you have exalted, just to give another contrast, we've talked about essence fever with the other exalt types, but Dragonbloods have a lesser set of fever with this. There's no kind of, I must go and conquer the world kind of feeling. It's linked to emotions and feeling emotions strongly, and the response is linked to your aspect, what element of Dragon-blooded you are.
Yeah, so a fire-blooded aspect may, as the standard stereotype, I think, just get really, really angry at things, but equally they might be, again, you said artists, the kind of artist that gets absolutely Fruit Loopy into their work, or equally the kind of politician, because the other dragon-blooded fire aspect archetype is orator, and they'll be the sort that will be knocking you back with the fact that they are just getting into the delivery of it. But then equally, an earth-blooded one, the average peasant might think, oh, they don't have any big emotional swing thing from their essence, because that's the point. They're a stone. Their heightened emotional state from their elemental essence is not showing any emotional state.
Yes. You get pulled in the direction of your aspect. I think with that, we should probably talk through the aspects as well. Oh, no, sorry, Anima Flux first.
Anima Flux, the funny thing.
It's the equivalent of anima levels for the other exalt types. So while Solars get a glowing thing on their foreheads and get progressively more and more shiny, Dragon-blooded get progressively more and more related to their element. So fire aspects will burst into flames and start setting things on fire that they touch. Air elementals, as they kind of go up, you'll get sudden gusts of wind that come out of nowhere, or right to a full-on gale at the top level of their anima. Earth, you think, oh yes, nice, stable. No, you get earthquakes.
And or sandstorms, because the other one that people forget about with Earth is that Earth is also keyed to sand. For those of you running your games in the south.
Yeah. I'd be interested to see a sandstorm in the north, to be fair.
That would also be quite funny.
Yeah, just for pure variety. And what's the last one? Water.
And wood.
Yes.
We've forgotten two.
We've forgotten two. Water will give you thunderstorms. Although lightning is very much air, but yeah, you'll get storms and rain and everything else with water aspects. And wood elementals, things will start growing around them. The way I think about it is kind of the ending of Fern Gully, the kind of wherever you go, plants spring up underfoot sort of thing.
Yeah, it is equal to mention as well, though, that the Animaflux here, that kind of makes it sound... Well, no, some of them sound about right for it, because it's important that it is also mechanistically pretty much always a damage effect or a variant of a damage effect around them. Because the wood one there sounds nice and friendly, until you realise it's just poisonous thorns popping into people.
Yes, and if plants of any sort are sprouting from you and you go and grapple someone, then even if it turns out to be something that isn't thorns, trying to get them to break out of a tree that's wrapped around their limbs is not going to be helpful.
Yeah, I say it really comes down to the broad thing that dragons are more common and less puissant. I won't say less powerful, but less puissant than the Celestial Exalts in terms of just raw Celestial power juice. But they tend to make so much of a bigger mess. Yeah,
this is true. And that kind of power level, I don't know where this would fit later on, but I just wanted to make a point of it anyway. Looking through the Dragon Blood charms, at least for 3rd edition, some of them will cap out before Essence 5, which is interesting. I mean, it's part of that is making room for homebrew and stuff like that, but some of it is also just dragons are less powerful. They have charms that have effects that are not keyed to quite the same level as the higher Dragon Blooded can ratchet.
That's the other thing as well, while we're talking broadly. The thing with Dragon Blood is about how long they last, because it's much like everything else with them. It's quite a bit less than their Celestial peers, because they tend to go for about, again, Edition Wars changes the number, but I'm pretty sure 3rd settles for they tend to cap out at around 300-400 years or so, which is still longer than a human, and for pretty much the vast majority of it, they will hit a point in their natural aging that is arbitrarily determined so that you and your players can decide if you want to be an old man one or not, basically. But they'll pretty much stick there at their prime, quote-unquote, for the majority of their lifespan. And equally, most Dragon Bloods don't make it to 300 or 400 because they have a habit of getting killed.
Yes, because when you have rulers that sit around for that long, people tend to conspire. And that also can be extended with sorcery and various means. To give one example, I think Nemon's approaching about 1,000, one of the heads of the realm great houses, is approaching 1,000 and shows no signs of slowing down.
Yeah, and the Empress herself... The problem with the Empress herself is we don't know how old she was when she ascended, but it's been more than several Dragon-Blooded lifetimes just of her reign.
Yes, there are shenanigans you can do to extend a Dragon-Blood's life. You cannot end up with full-on immortality because that's one of the cast iron rules of Exalted. One of only about 3, I think.
No immortality, no true resurrection, no time travel. 3.
Yeah, 3. That's kind of the broad scope of Dragon-Blooded being and such like. I keep on thinking, oh yes, we can go into detail about the cast at this point, but no, there's one other point, is that the element they exalt under will affect how they look. There will be little minor elemental effects that go on, like a fire aspect may always smell slightly of wood smoke or always be warm to the touch, that sort of thing.
This can also manifest as anime hair colours.
Yes, so you can have your green-haired wood aspect who is entirely in touch with nature and whispers to all the beasts and that sort of thing. Blue for both water and air, depending on how you want to do. You can absolutely make something like Raiden out of an air aspect, I'm sure.
Yeah.
If you build the right martial arts and have things like lightning bouncing around the eyes as an air aspect effect.
We don't have a hat-throwing martial arts yet.
That's an invitation for all you homebrewers out there. Get on it.
Make me my hat martial arts. I demand of it.
Yes.
And equally with the aspects. I always said we wouldn't go into full edition wars of it, but the one thing the editions are consistent of, the element that a dragon isn't purely random. That also comes in the heredity, because they do make the line in 3rd, the very funny one of the gossip in upper-class dragon-blooded societies will tend to be if a child exalts out of aspect of its parents, they'll be like, oh, who's not the father then?
Yeah. Although, in fairness, fathers tend to not matter quite so much.
Yeah, but it's the thing of the mother's the one you can confirm. That's the one that you can't really claim, she's not the real mother.
That's true. Yes. But anyway, to the general properties of the cast. First off, the heir aspects, the children of Mela, as we've said. We've ungenerously just shouted, nerds, for this one. But they are your scholarly ones, your idealists, your people who will come up with ideas and such like. And in third, I absolutely love it. For pretty much every type, I think there's only one or two where they don't give you a type of general that this person will wind up being. So
this is Sun Tzu.
Yeah. Well, air aspects are your mavericks.
Yeah.
They're the ones who will defy conventional wisdom, come up with something fantastically brilliant, and dominate the battlefield.
Yeah, Sun Tzu would be a water aspect.
Yes.
Yeah, in broad terms, though, where every exaltation does have a nerd cast or nerd aspect, it's the air. They're the clever ones, and they're the ones that, if you want to do sorcery, this is the easiest route in. Like, if you are power gaming for wizardry and nerd stuff, this is where you go.
Mm-hmm, yep. And air aspects properties, going from 3rd edition, you can pay motes to leap a range band. You have a limited amount of flight. You can also deflect missiles with sudden gusts of wind. Once per day, you can get bonus dice on social or mental actions to uphold an intimacy, and that's based on the strength of the intimacy.
I was looking at it compared to the fire one and thinking, are they just the same thing?
Yeah, they get similar-ish, but one of the things that I like about the way that these come across in 3rd is that they're very, very systematic in how all of the cast abilities progress in the kind of level of power that they can do.
Yeah.
So this was a really nice piece of design work for Exalted 3rd. I like it a lot.
Yeah, then we have the Earth-blooded, the children of Passiap, who they don't really fit into the standard gameplay archetype ones. They are your chunky stoics, your traditionalists, I say chunky basically because both stereotypically and mechanically, you're going to build a tank here. Even if you try to build something else, you'll accidentally end up as a tank. They're very good at this. Mechanically, they get to pay motes to add even more natural soak and hardness, as well as to get bonus defense against attacks that would try and move you, which you get for free when you're at Bonfire. They can pay motes to ignore wound penalties, and they can spend initiative to knock foes prone when their Anima Flux kicks in. This does then very much sort of manifest as... Again, I'm basically reiterating an Earthblood that I made and used as an NPC, where if you are going for a general, you are the by-the-book sort of commander. It's not to say that they're bad at it, because a lot of the other ones keep going with, they'll do this unexpected wild thing. An Earthblood general is going to be very, very by the book. He's not going to do anything that will surprise you, but there is a degree to which, if you are following the book exactly, you get very, very good at doing what the book tells you to do.
Yes, and quite a few of the books, if you're going with at least historical manuals, tell you to do the unexpected. And Sun Tzu, in particular, is very keyed towards make sure you can win before you think about fighting. So if an Earth aspect Dragon-blooded is doing things properly, then they will absolutely wipe the floor with you, and you will be able to see it coming a mile away and do nothing about it.
Yeah, and it's equally as well, though, because this is another thing that Third does wonderfully. Not only does it give you basically, here's a general for each of them, it also is very, very clear to be like, and here's the one who doesn't fight. And
yes,
with the Earth aspects, you basically only have two major options there, where you end up in the clergy as a monk of some flavour, because you're good at following the book. Or equally, and this is the one that I find more amusing as an idea to run with, where you end up in the bureaucracy as the literal grinding gear.
Yes, and just making sure that everything works. Yeah. And in total contrast to that, you have your fire aspects, your children of Heshiesh. These are emotional people. These are your firebrand orators. The intriguers angle for fire is kind of the smoke sort of thing. The kind of, you can tell something's going on, but nothing's quite being clear. And a few of their abilities kind of key off the idea of fire producing shadow, as well as just being outright flame. Their general archetype is the lead from the front generals, the ones who will be waving the sword and the first one to hit the line of battle sort of thing. The ones that will stir people by being the ones who lead by example.
Yeah, they are archetypally a sort of strange combo of the fighting one, which, again, every Exalt has a fighter class one, and fire is always a good pick for that, although all Dragonbloods are kind of good at fighting.
Yeah.
And the social one rolled into one. Again, there are others who can do social, but when you look through the Dragon-blooded charms, all of the most potent social charms are fire-keyed.
Yes. The fire aspect's anima abilities are pay motes to be immune to fire-based environmental hazards for a scene, because being immune to your own fire is one of those big archetypal things. You get bonuses to resist fire-based attacks. Once per day, you get bonus dice to actions to uphold an emotions-based intimacy. So this is keeping your emotions going and resisting attempts to kind of water your passions down, sort of thing.
Or equally in defense of those emotions, because it's the sort of thing of...
Yeah.
The standard stereotype one I think of with that one is very much, again, just to steal from Avatar, because this is the basket we can take from with Dragonblood so much. Your fire-blooded Prince Zuko, who will defend his family's honor, and the moment you say, your dad's not a really good king, is he, mate? Then you can just go absolutely mental at them, and you get your bonuses on it.
Yes, absolutely. Also, the fire anima flux deals more damage. If people don't have hardness or ways to resist magical things, it will do more damage to them. Because fire is bad and painful.
Hardness isn't magic resistance. It's
decisive damage resistance.
Yeah.
But you have a job getting hardness without magic being behind it, is my issue.
Yeah. I was going to say, it's more the thing of I'm sort of thinking is like, you can get some hardness from particularly heavy armor, even if it's mundane.
Mm.
So it's that sort
Fair
of thing.
enough.
It's just, yeah. Fire hurts if you're not protected.
Basically. And last but not least, we have...
No, second to last.
Second to last.
We keep forgetting wood aspects.
We can't count. I think that's what it basically comes down to. We can't count up to 5.
We have the water aspects. The Children of Danad, who are, of all of them, probably the ones that fit the least into a clean archetypal box. They're adaptable, they're persistent, they're cerebral but not necessarily academic, they're the problem solvers. General-wise, they're the sort of flexible general. I always imagine a water-blooded general as very sort of cool in presentation, and it's sort of thing of he'll try this, and it doesn't work, you get bounced, and he'll just instantly adapt, no pride in there to sting, that sort of bit.
Yeah, and the kind of takes one look at the battle lines and, oh, this is totally not what I prepared for. You do that, you do that, you do that, you do that. And everything is chaos for about half an hour, and then everything works.
Yeah, they're anima ability things. They can pay motes to move across water like it's solid land for all of your favourite Kung Fu movie tricks. They can pay motes to get bonuses to disengage, to withdraw, or to resist being grappled. And they can breathe water like it's air and suffer no penalties for being submerged.
Yes, they're the only ones that don't really have a kind of a once per day kind of thing that goes into it. Or, oh no, wood doesn't either. Now I look at it, and wood is the last one. It is the last one, and because we now actually have the full... I'm now actually looking at the list. This is helpful. The Children of Sextus Gilus. These are experiential, sensual people. These are people who are full of life in various ways. When you look at fire aspects, you kind of think, well, they could potentially be someone who's a bit of an aesthete, someone who's likely to indulge and be engaged fully with pleasure and emotions, but wood aspects are likely to do things for the pleasure of enjoying them, not because of any emotion they get out of them. And the archetype general for the wood aspect is one who is always learning. There's a little bit of an overlap here with the water in the sense of, or can always adapt, but there's the idea that a wood aspect general will never get set in his ways, will bend but not break sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see it, more just because... The way I've sort of thought it is, water aspects, they always go on about in all the books that the folly of a water aspect is that they will spend several million years planning and never actually do anything. Whereas, like, the wood aspects are kind of the opposite. They're not too jumpy like fire, but they're always a bit too eager, if that makes sense. Again, it's like I said, with the archetypal water general, I saw the very sort of cool, calm, collected sort of general that's just like, oh, they've broken our lines. Get them and do that one. Whereas with the wood one, I'm seeing the rookie. I'm seeing the hero with the flag going, yeah, we're doing this, keep going. And he might make stupid mistakes, but he'll he will learn from them. It's the difference of that sort of thing. The water aspect adapts because his enemy is smart. The wood aspect adapts because he made a mistake, sort of thing.
Yeah, although that kind of feels like you're possibly going to wind up with a bit of a stale sort of... And trying to do any story with a wood aspect general that isn't coming of age, I think you might struggle. Just purely on that basis.
Yeah, although the equal thing you can do with that is you can sort of lean into some of the other aspects of wood and you have it be... It's why the always learning general, I'm not really sure that's the nicest way to put it, because the way I've seen it done and the way I've definitely done it with wood aspected military commanders is they'll be the ones that are most in touch with their troops.
Yeah.
They'll be the ones that actually will go tent to tent and will know the rank and file soldiery's names. Whereas a water, again, to compare them to the water to whom they are kind of most similar, the water aspect one is very much your pieces on my board.
Yep.
Let's go.
Yeah, I can absolutely see that. It makes sense with the whole kind of wood is life sort of thing that the wood aspects have going on.
And also then the standard thing of, well, as a wood aspect one, even if they're a commander, they might not be top level army, they probably will be with the scouts. Just because, yeah, good luck catching them when the forest does what they say.
Yeah, or just the environment in general. That is one thing that you'll find with most Dragon-Blooded. As much as they have charms that are general sort of social or survival or melee or so on, there will be specific situations in which Dragon-Blooded charms will absolutely shine because they key up with the aspects and the nature of it. Just as an example, I was having a look through the presence charms for Dragon-Blooded ahead of the cast, and there is absolutely nothing to rouse any emotions other than anger. All of the Dragon-Blooded charms that involve inciting an emotion will build up anger. They won't do anything else. You can't try invoke an emotion of your choice with a speech or with a particular interaction. It's always focused around particular examples. And likewise with quite a few of the survival ones, the things that allow you to move through particular forms of terrain, they will be keyed to particular types of terrain, like going through the undergrowth or something like that. It won't allow you to navigate quicksand particularly easily, that sort of thing.
Yeah, but then it is equally the sort of flip side of, in those areas that they shine, they, even though the law kind of says that it should be a gap between an individual dragon and an individual solo,
yeah,
they can actually kind of go toe-to-toe when they're on their favoured ground.
Yes, which is partly why things like the Wild Hunt function the way they do, which we will get to. But we need to finish off going through the general bits and pieces of Dragon-Blooded before we get to the specifics of that stuff. Just to wrap up on the wood aspect stuff, they can pay motes to become immune to plant-based poisons and have bonuses to resist other types of poisons, which is free at bonfire. If someone's trying to poison you while you're at bonfire, generally that's probably too subtle.
It depends if it's on a weapon.
Yeah, true.
And equally, it's the line of, I know at least, because the way I sort of see this is it's, again, lore-wise, the whole thing, but mechanistically, I don't think it's really designed with, like, other people with a blowgun in mind. I think it is more in mind of, yeah, here you go, you're fighting this big monster or whatever that's got a nasty little poison effect on its bite that reduces your penalties or whatever, where you can just shrug that off.
Okay, that might just be me being a pedant with the difference between poisons and venoms then. But
mechanically, they're the same.
Yeah, okay, I'll get off my poisons must be ingested, venom is directed into the bloodstream point then. Anyway, wood can also pay motes to ignore penalties to evasion or movement in general. That's the whole kind of moving through the undergrowth type thing. And their anima flux is poisonous.
In indirect play, I will tell you this, of all the ones I've seen, and I have now seen with either players or NPCs, basically all of the Dragon-Blooded anima fluxes go off. The wood one's by far the most devastating.
Okay, so you kind of have people just collapsing from gas clouds, basically.
Yeah, you flavour your anima flux however you like, but it's more that, again, this isn't a mechanics show, none of us know what numbers are, but things die a lot more from that just because it tends to be a bit of persistent damage and it will get people into their penalties, whereas the other ones do a bit of damage and then if the enemy is clever, they step away.
Yes, which generally, and I know this isn't the storyteller's portion of this podcast, but that's one way of particularly if you're trying to take solars down a peg or two, get environmental damage in little and often so that they can start burning away things to try and get their resistances up, or they will just have persistent wound penalties all the time. But
in any game system based on storyteller, chip damage is king, because no one has much health. But anyway, on even more broad general dragon-blooded topics, because these are somehow more confusing to go through than the Lunas were. Now, I know on our little list here we've got something before it, but I think we'd want to go to the Great Curse first, because we want to get the things that set me arguing off first, where the editions behave differently with the Great Curse for dragons. The Great Curse, for those of you just tuning into this one, is the big curse that the Primordials put on the Solars or all of the Exalted, depending on who you listen to.
I think that's where your beef is going to come from, but anyway.
Yes, at the end of the Divine Revolution, because they didn't like being killed, quite understandably. Dragons are interesting. They, mechanically, in third, they don't have anywhere near as much of a problem with the Great Curse as the Solars do. They don't have a limit track, they don't have to worry about any of that stuff. They can act against their intimacies as much as they like, but they basically have a sort of, not quite persistent, but, to use a better term, at-will tendency to act up based on their elements. So, a Fire Dragonblood will have trouble pretty much consistently and over time restraining themselves when they're getting too emotional. An Air aspect will struggle with, well, not being smug is what I recall from that, basically. They have that sense of mental superiority.
Yeah, getting wrapped up in the details, being aloof. That's probably the better word.
Yeah, water aspects want to sit down and plan all day, and earth aspects don't like it when you do anything different, etc., etc. Wood aspects can't deal with being alone, question mark. I'm trying to remember what the wood one is. I think it's something like that. They don't like being lonely.
Yeah, and it's basically you can apply those whenever you feel like it, and if you act up in accordance with your Great Curse, you'll generally be in line for an expression bonus from your storyteller. Basically, it functions like a flaw in the game, mechanically speaking.
The issue here is I have opinions.
Yes!
Because even though they've said, oh, no, it's fine, it's a lesser version of it, and mechanically they basically don't have it, they've still gone with the thing of lore-wise dragons suffer from it, which rubs me very much up the wrong way, because it kind of was the Solars thing thematically more than anything else. But if the Great Curse is just the Solars thing, that lines in with their whole hubris shtick. If everyone else starts having to deal with it, even in reduced quantities, it kind of makes that now everyone's thing. It's weird, because third, mechanically, does exactly what I'd want. Where it's like, yeah, basically doesn't happen, you've got your own little element play about for the psychological effects of your exaltation. But they couldn't resist saying, no, but really in the lore, this is how it goes.
Yeah, I can see that, but then again, hubris is not necessarily just a Solars thing, it's an Exalted thing.
Yeah, it's more the line of my disdain for them aside. Why would the Sids put up with the dragons if they were having the same problem that the Solars were?
Is it just because no one actually knows about the Great Curse?
Potentially, although I thought the Great Curse's existence was knowledge in some celestial circles.
There are some that are beginning to suspect it, at least in third, but it's nothing concrete.
Okay.
They're starting to twig something is up, but the whole rebellion against the Solars in the first stage was down to, these guys are going crazy, we need to put them down. It's not, oh no, this inevitable curse is playing out.
Yeah. Again, we're going bottom-up versus top-down reasoning here, because I was going to say, I know in second at least, the bureaus did know that the Great Curse was a thing, and it's notable because Sids don't suffer from it, and I think, well, we don't have Sids in third yet, but Sids very explicitly, they were the ones that's like, Lunas kind of go crazy in their own way, we've discussed that, Dragons kind of go crazy in their own way. Sids basically didn't get touched by the Great Curse, either because of first and second differ in this, either because they were missed out by the Primordials because of how Sids behave, or the Maidens had a workaround of sorts, and it's why you can't remember them, because it's a curse in its own right.
I'm sure I remember hearing somewhere that it was either arcane fate and that you will just never be remembered, or there was supposedly some Great Curse against them that meant that when they work collectively, they will screw up. I'm sure I remember
Yeah.
that from somewhere for Sidereals.
The Arcane Fate, I do know that one is it, but that one, as I understood it, the Maidens had a role in that being how it manifested.
Right.
All of the Cids might not have agreed, let's have this, but the Cids' bosses said, right, okay, if we're going to have these bad vibes cast at us, let's make them work in a useful way.
Okay, so they had a say in it in the way that the other Exalts didn't. Yep.
Because it's the Maidens.
Yeah.
And they can do what they like.
That's fair enough.
But yeah, anyway.
Dragon blood.
That all aside.
Dragon-blooded. The other little fun thing linked to the dragon-blooded exaltation is that they can form what's called sworn kinships. They can basically swear an oath to be kin with other dragon-blooded, and the precise wording of the oath and its purpose will vary culturally, but it basically binds dragon-blooded together. A sworn kinship, or a half, you'll see both terms, basically will have an awareness of each other wherever they all are. So you'll know, oh, so-and-so from my sworn kin is roughly 3,000 miles to the north of me, sort of thing.
It's a law and mechanistic way of forming a party, which is really, really nice. Some nice ludonarrative synchronicity. And it's great because this lets us slide in the purposive approach of Exalts again, where it's, like we said, the Solars were made to be the boys in charge. The Lunas were meant to kind of be, well, we had debates over what it was last time, but we ultimately said with the Lunas were meant to be for the little guy. The Dragons were meant to work as a team. That's what sets them apart from all of the other deliberately made Exalts. They were designed to work as a team, and this is the actual magical manifestation of that. They were always meant to be an army. And, well, you see that in how they behave in creation.
It's varied edition to edition.
In an army, then.
Yes, and so a lot of their charms will link up and interact with multiple dragon-blooded and play better if you have more dragon-blooded along. Third pitches them as either the generals, or as in the on-the-ground generals, or the NCOs, so to speak, of the Divine Revolution. They're not your foot soldiers. And that repositioning has done a huge amount for them, I think, because second edition had a bad habit of saying that the Dragon-blooded really were never meant to be in charge, and that was kind of the bottom reasoning, was because they were grunts. Whereas they've kind of had a bit of a makeover in third to say that, yes, these are the least powerful of the Exalted, but they're still Exalted. These guys are still fantastic and special and can do wondrous stuff.
To be the second edition apologist that I am, though, what it actually comes down to is how you look at humans. Because I never saw that issue of, look, dragons were never meant to be in charge because they were the grunts in the Divine Revolution. I read that more as, you're dealing with primordials. Doesn't matter how many humans you get along, they're not going to do jack. It's a human, and in this setting especially, humans are pretty much worthless.
Maybe.
Against most supernatural threats, and especially ones that big, some Solars could take on human armies in the tens of thousands if they wanted to.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Primordials definitely could. And it's that sort of line of, they were the least of the Exalts, but they were the foot soldiers not because, we'll just make them like slight factory seconds. It's, no, this is how we can make something powerful enough to fight these things.
Yes. Okay, and with that in mind, are there any other features of sworn kinships that back into that? Sworn kinships can be broken by saying particular words, and the members of the kinships will feel that if it happens, and they will feel great magically induced sorrow when the kinship breaks.
Yeah.
But I don't... I'm trying to think whether there was anything else.
I'm struggling to think, mostly because it's a great crime for a storyteller of a Dragon-blooded game to confess this, but the games were going on near upwards of a year, and there's still not one of them.
Yep.
They still haven't done it. And it is becoming the awful rom-com, will they, won't they, become a sworn kinship.
Oh, dear. Yeah, you need to give them a bit more of a sense of purpose in that case, because, it will vary depending on the society of Dragon-blooded that you're dealing with, but you'll have certain signifiers of sworn kinships and namings and specific purposes for each sworn kinship, so it's very, very easy to see the purpose for them. Again, to go to the kind of the gamification aspect, You can say, right, design me characters that are in this sworn kinship, which is formed for this purpose. It's also described as a bit of a spiritual high. It makes the bonds that the various members of the kinship form that much more solid.
It is the thing of dragons do, just sort of to jump back to my thing about them being meant to work together, quote unquote. They do, even in the third where they were the officers, it is the thing of dragons get along better with other dragons than other exalts do with others of their own kind. You can't quite, in third you can't call it a natural urge, but in second you very much could. They do have an urge to organise, basically, for use of a term. You put 20 Dragon Bloods together, they will come up with a structure. And yes, because it's a role-playing game where there's lots of fighting, this tends to be military, but like you put 10 Dragon-Blooded scholars from different corners of creation in a room, they'll put together basically a little scholar circle where they have their roles and their things to do. Whereas you do that with Solars, they'll be butting heads over matters of pride and ego constantly.
Yes. No, they're absolutely meant to be sort of teamwork and sort of thing, which means that Dragon-Blooded have always had a better relationship with the rest of creation than the other Celestials. And this is one of the things about the setting, that your other main Exalt types are always, to an extent, hiding from greater systems. You've got Solars and Lunars who are considered anathema by the Immaculate Faith, and so if there's anywhere that the realm touches, the largest empire in creation goes anywhere near, then the Solars and Lunars will basically be hunted down. There's nowhere, apart from the lunar dominions, potentially, and again, it depends on the precise nature of who's in charge of which dominion, but generally speaking, Dragon-Blooded will be accepted.
It's not just accepted, usually lauded. Because, like you sort of said, the other Exalts are hiding from these greater systems. As a dragon, you're not just part of that greater system, you are born with a right to it.
Generally speaking.
The flip side of what the Immaculate Order has done in declaring, spoilers again for our Immaculate Order episode, but declaring Dragon-Bloods are the only good Exalt, they're the best one, they're super cool, you want to be like them. It kind of now means that wherever a dragon step, if there are Immaculates there, the local folk, what are believing in the Immaculate thing and going to their temple worship all the time, will be like, oh yeah, that's a dragon, he's great. It's the flip side of like a Solar walking into a random village on a quest, openly admitting he's a Solar, will be met with, at best, slight glances and what's going on with you then. Whereas a dragon doing the same will, at worst, be, okay, you're an honourable enemy, but we still respect you.
Yes, and a lot of that will depend on what society they come from, rather than whether or not they're a Dragon-Blooded. One of the things that Thirds kind of put across is basically trying to divorce the idea of the Dragon-Blooded from the realm as such. I mean, we'll get into talking about the different Dragon-Blooded societies in a second. They also say that if you want to kind of play the lone folk hero who is loved everywhere they go, and something that's cherished by the people sort of thing, Dragon-Bloods are given that sort of an archetype, simply because of that universal acceptance.
Yeah, and it is equally, like you sort of said again, we'll get into their specific societies in a sec, but dragons, much more than any of the other Exalt types, I would argue, I don't want to say their caste, their aspect doesn't matter to their character, but compared to the others, they are much more culturally and socially determined than they are magically. Like, when someone approaches you with a Solar and is like, yeah, this is a Dawn-cast Solar, you can get a rough idea of what you're getting into as a person, not just as anything else. Because it's like, yeah, okay, they might not just be a big hulking brute with a great big axe, but the other Exalt types give you your caste or your aspect based on actual personality traits, whereas the Dragon-Blooded one, it's like, no. What's much more important to a dragon is whether they're from the realm, or Luxai, or Prasad, than whether they're a fire aspect or a wood aspect.
Yeah, and that can, to an extent, also do good things in terms of cross-cultural exchange. You can get people bonding by being the same aspect in some ways across those different societies. And all of those societies that we've just named, we will kind of rattle through them relatively briefly in a second, but there's also the term outcasts, Dragon-Bloods who don't belong to any of those particular societies. That's generally how it's referred to. The realm specifically calls them lost eggs because...
I thought you were only a lost egg if you came to the realm afterwards. Because I thought they still used Outcast for Random Wandering Dragon, then Lost Egg if Random Wandering Dragon comes to the realm and is like, I want to be. And equally, not being in the houses. Not being in the houses, that's what Outcast is.
Yeah. But all of the Dragon-blooded societies that we're going to go over are very, very keen to hoover up any roving Dragonbloods they come across, because they're very, very useful and, generally speaking, aren't going to disrupt things. They're going to help any society they're part of by their presence, rather than totally tear it to bits.
And so, the actual civilizations of the dragons that we have are, first and foremost, the realm. The big guys. The ones who are getting their episode the soonest, because they're completely unavoidable in the setting, and we keep having to talk around them.
Pretty much, yes. The realm is basically the remnants of a creation-spanning dragon-blooded empire. It was formed by the Scarlet Empress in the early years of the Second Era. Following the Great Contagion, the Scarlet Empress went into the Imperial Manse at the centre of the world, switched on the realm defense grid, or the Sword of Creation if you want to wax poetic, and flattened all of the Fae in creation with the flick of a switch of a magical nuke. And she basically founded the realm off the back of that. It was basically her way or the highway, based on her comrades from her shogunate days campaigning for her, organising armies, and if anyone disagreed with them or her on that, then she would obliterate them.
Yeah, and the shogunate is that older empire that was loosely mentioned at the start there. The realm nowadays, unfortunately, is not doing too hotly. It's kind of falling apart. The Empress has disappeared. That's kind of the conceit of the whole game. It's being divvied up by noble houses. It's all a bit Dune.
Yes, the great houses, I think, if we can talk about those for a second, because they are the kind of the dragon-blooded blocks of the realm. The great houses are based off the Scarlet Empress's dragon-blooded children and extended family, basically. In
not
quite
just
a few
that,
ways.
though. Nellens exists.
Well, Nellens was a mortal lover of the Empress.
Yeah, it had nothing to do with any of her kids, is the sort of thing.
True enough. And in fairness, Tepet, now I say that, because Tepet was in open rebellion against the Empress at one point. But yeah, these are all of the gamut of the great houses. This is also called the dynasty, and the whole structure is built to make the dragon-blooded the cream of the crop and make sure that they run everything.
When I was saying that your social things matter a lot more than your aspect as a dragon, for Realmborn, it's your house.
Yes.
Because when two Realmborn dragons meet each other, they're not going to be like, oh, are you a wood aspect or a water aspect? It'll be what house, and then pistols at dawn off of that if you're the wrong one.
Yes. The way that they keep up with being dragon-blooded and manage the dragon-blooded families and lineages, which I think is probably the last point before we delve into all of the stuff that should be in the Realm episode, is that they will aim to capture the most potent dragon-blooded essence. They will cultivate lines where you will reliably get dragon-blooded every single generation. And so you will get bloodlines that have very, very rich terrestrial essence, and there's a huge amount of negotiations around marriages to try and arrange for everyone to make sure that they get what they want from the marriage, and the likelihood of turning out dragon-blooded scions in the next generation is a huge factor in those marriage negotiations.
Yeah, how that happens, like we said, changes with additions, and again, the strength of opinions that marriage politics being so big doesn't actually make that much sense with how Third says getting a dragon blood works.
The Third tends to make it a lot looser, but I kind of go on the assumption of the great houses are concentrated enough in their essence that getting successive dragon bloods right the way through generations is the norm for certain bloodlines.
Yeah, but the other thing with the realm as well, before we chop it off and leave it for its own episode, it's, of the Dragonblood societies, it's the one that's the big scary colonial empire. And don't think modern colonial, think again very much China. That's exactly how it behaves. It's using Iranian vocab because it has satrapies instead of anything else, but they are basically just Chinese tributary states.
Yes, they're called satrapies. They don't function like satrapies.
They function like Chinese tributaries.
Yep. The next one along is Lookshy.
The boys. My guys, Luxai are the real heirs to the shogunates.
Ooh.
They're the ones who didn't decide to go off and become a standard hereditary noble monarchy. They kept the martial culture of the shogunates. They were formed not by a single officer who called herself an empress, but by the 7th Legion, who decide to still run it as... Well, Luxai, it's a city-state before we get any grand ideas, but it's a city-state in perhaps one of the most important strategic positions in creation. But it's a city-state, and it's not really run like a city. It's run like a military camp and has been for centuries.
Yeah, thematically, it's what happens when you smash Sparta into Minas Tirith.
Samurai Sparta, if you will like.
Yes.
Because it also, name-wise, the quick and dirty cheat sheet for when you're reading the lore, if the name is vaguely Chinese or sounds made up, they're from the realm. If the name is obviously just Japanese, they're from Luxai.
Yes. But the main difference from this, I mean, Luxai was founded when the 7th Legion took stock and was obeying the last set of orders they got to protect the river province, which is why they set up camp and just basically hunkering down and defending until a shogun arises, because the system of government across creation beforehand was a military dictatorship, right up until the Empress did her thing. And so Luxai is aiming to maintain that structure and keep that structure in place because they are following their old orders. If you look at them, they also have several of the Shogunate era social structures, which we'll get to in a Luxai episode. And while they have the Immaculate Faith, they do not necessarily have the Immaculate Order behind them. In terms of doctrine, the realm has the Immaculate Philosophy and Luxai has the Immaculate Faith. So you get some differences there.
Though behind the scenes, they are still run by the same goons.
Oh, yeah.
Luxai as well is the weird thing of Luxai will crop up in almost as many episodes as the Realm does, just because it's also one of the... Yeah, I'll say 3. I'll exclude Sigyn, just to be rude. It's one of the 3 figurehead cities of the Scavenger Lands, which is the standard setting. And it is very much the martial one. And again, the thing that's kind of impressive about Luxai is, despite it being a little city-state, it's beaten the realm in 4 wars so far.
Well, it has held the realm off. That's because they have a good stock of first-stage weaponry. They essentially have magical mecha suits, and in theory they have an airship division, although...
They have a sky fleet.
In the current era, that's pretty much mothballed because there's so little of it left.
Yeah, but then again, even the Realm Sky Fleet is only like 20-something ships in 3rd. But yeah, they've got all the bits, and even though they have less people, soldier for soldier, their soldiers will be better equipped than the Realms ones, just because larger number of fancy kit, smaller number of people.
Yes. As it goes to the idea of dragon-blooded essence and successions and all the rest of it, if I can put it in really crude terms, the Realm breeds for quality, Luxai breeds for quantity. They don't care about how likely a given bloodline is to produce a dragon-blooded. They just want lots of dragon-blooded. So that has an impact on both the status of particular families. I mean, the Genties are still a thing. And so you do have that kind of concentration of power, which you'll get in most dragon-blooded societies. But you will also get things like, one of the things that kind of struck me when I looked at it is that promiscuity is not frowned on nearly as much in Luxai as it is in the realm, because they don't care to keep it in families. So long as there's possible breeding going on, they don't care.
Which again is weird given how 3rd says doing it works. The other thing about Luxai as well, part of the reason it doesn't actually need to do that is because of its location in the Scavenger Lands. We mentioned that they like older civilizations like hoovering up outcasts. The Scavenger Lands, lore-wise, it's had a weird little thing happen to it, where it being the standard setting for so long, game-wise, has kind of affected it lore-wise that you just find more magic crap there, including exalts and people. It's sort of the thing of where you're most likely to find outcasts popping up is in the Scavenger Lands, partially just because population density, but I like running it of the fact that the Scavenger Lands, weirdly, is lore-wise also the standard setting.
Yeah, it's because 1st edition kind of put the most effort into the Scavenger Lands as a setting, and then inertia took over, basically.
And they've kind of had to retroactively justify all of the things about the Scavenger Lands.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing for the Scavenger Lands episode.
Yes.
Luxai is cool. They're the good dragons.
No, but they're the better dragons, maybe. But now we kind of ratchet it down by quite a huge degree. Lookshy and the Realm have full-on societies and multi-generational traditions and a large influence over multiple areas. These next ones are basically groups of dragon-blooded along a particular theme. This then goes into things like the Cult of the Violet Fang, which is, you remember we said that Lookshy was a leftover shogunate legion that had hunkered down in a particular place. The Cult of the Violet Fang is descended from a single garrison that was holed up in a fortress cathedral in the northwest. They made a truce with the Fae in the area because they were basically battling against the hordes of Fae encroaching on reality that happened just after the Great Contagion. And they made a truce with them. So they send out what I assume was some sort of Hunger Games style tribute offering originally, but has basically just become a ritual that any dragon-blooded within the society must go out and make a pilgrimage into the wild and bring something back. But all of the dragon-blooded in the Cult of the Violet Fang are holed up in a single cathedral, so it's not exactly like it's a broom cupboard and there are 3 of them, but they are holed up in one fairly large monastic-ish community, and everyone kind of clusters around them, and you're not considered a true dragon-blooded by the cult until you have ventured out and made your pilgrimage into the wild, received some sponsorship from the Fae out there, and then brought some kind of treasure back or been changed somehow.
Yeah, there are ways to make these guys players and good, but it's kind of obvious at a first read that these guys are coded to be villains.
Pretty much, although, well, we'll get to the villains argument once we've summed up Dragon-Blooded as a whole.
The Wanasan, however...
Yeah.
Who are you going to call?
Yeah, pretty much.
They're Dragon Ghostbusters.
Yes.
They're hidden out west, I believe?
Yes, they're out west, and they travel from place to place. They are an order of dragon-blooded exorcists. They're the ones that people call them in to deal with particular ghost infestations, and if things get particularly bad, they will negotiate payment, and then they will do what they need to do to get rid of any particular ghosts.
And so now the immediate comedy pitch again, you can literally just do Ghostbusters, but in Exalted.
Maybe, if you really want.
Who are you going to call?
It doesn't work on the syllables. I'm fighting to try and get Wanasan to fit into the Ghostbusters syllable range. But it doesn't
Wanasan.
work. Maybe.
There's already the long vowel.
Yeah, okay. Fine.
Anyway.
Fine, I'll roll over and accept that. Yeah.
Then we have the Temple of the Reverent Whisper. Again, I'm just here taking all of the Scavenger Lands ones because that's my zone, that's my jam. The Temple of the Reverent Whisper are you can't even really call them a Dragon Blood organization. They're led by a Dragon Blood, and they have Dragon Bloods in them, but they're by no means exclusive. They're based out of Great Forks, which is one of the other cities of the Scavenger Lands, which is a fun place for friends and family. And basically, in as simple a way as I can put it, the Temple of the Reverent Whisper is a brothel for gods. You don't necessarily go there for the more sensual services, although some do, is the key point for it.
Yes.
And in Great Forks, it is seen as a god brothel, complete with the thing of any god who has to go there is seen as kind of like,
Okay, I think we should actually explain what they actually do, now that we've given them the skewed pitch.
They sell extremely, for money, and it is always money because it's Great Forks, extremely specific, tailored worship experiences for gods. Great Forks, for reference, is a city that's absolutely full of gods, and most of them don't really have much to do.
Well, we'll see what comes of that. As of this recording, the Exigence book isn't out. So we'll have to see what we get on Great Forks when that comes out, see if Third's going to revise Great Forks in any great detail.
Yeah. Older Great Forks had gods like most cities have foxes.
Yes.
But yeah, they would sell you worship. If you are a god who really just, the worship that you get from your cult, if you have a cult, just isn't right, if they're just praying to you and you need someone to sacrifice a live lamb on an altar made of onyx or whatever, They'll do that for you. They'll get the lamb, they'll build the altar, they'll do it for a price. Whatever the god asks, if they're paying enough, it's fine. It's run by a Dragon Blood and is considered a Dragon Blood organization because the desires of gods are quite a bit more than what normal humans are capable of in many cases. Like, some of them will ask, I want you to go and kill that fairy prince and sprinkle its blood upon my altar. And you can't really ask Dave the Mortal to go do that.
No, the other example I was thinking of are things like very extreme fasting and flagellation rituals and that sort of thing. Things that mortals are not going to survive, like literal baptism of fire sort of thing.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the example that's given in the book is self-immolation for some of them. And it is that sort of thing, because it's Great Forks, worship is as good as gold. Because gods, well, in Exalted, they don't need it, but they like it.
It's currency.
Yeah, and they can provide it. And they've got specialists in any sort of field. They'll have a specialist in self-immolation, as weird as that sort of sounds. They'll have the presumably dragon they've got there, whose day job is to walk into the little room and set himself on fire. And then he just gets his daily wage and goes down the pub.
More or less.
Equally, they will have the ones that will go on the hunting quests, or the ones that will do this or that or the other. They are one of the ones that's, without going too much into Great Forks, especially because my conception of it will change when that book comes out, they're one of the ones that's a lot easier for the players to work with, though not for, because they will contract out to people if they don't have the specialist for it.
Yeah, it's another one of those kind of conceits of, right, here's an organisation that will give you tasks to get players together.
They will give you quests.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're quite fun.
Yep. Next up, we have the Sisterhood of Pearls. The Sisterhood of Pearls are a splinter cult of the Immaculate Order. They are a heresy of the Immaculate Order, founded by two Immaculate missionaries who washed up on a place called the Isle of Fevers. They got a whole host of people on board with them and a handful of outcast dragon-blooded to support them, and won them over to the Immaculate Faith. And then they didn't really need to go anywhere else in order to kind of maintain their understanding of the Immaculate Philosophy. These two that founded it, Rising Flame and Willow's Strength, to give them their full names, they basically just sat and talked about the Immaculate Philosophy, winding up with various critiques about the status of dragon-blooded within the Immaculate hierarchy and various other things.
They're the more egalitarian ones, aren't they?
They are, kind of, yes, because they very much emphasise the notion that the dragon-blooded are there to serve the community sort of thing.
Yeah, because the way the mainstream Immaculate Order, again, not to get too deep into the philosophy of it, but the way the mainstream Immaculate philosophy treats the dragon blood is a wee bit master racy.
Yeah, they are the most perfect example of mortal life, and they are what you will attain if you live good and virtuous lives, and each of your reincarnations continues to do that. Once you have reached the top of the pyramid of reincarnation, you will be a dragon-blooded. And the Sisterhood of Pearls critiques that a little bit, and is basically on the point of falling apart, as the setting puts it, that they've wound up with these critiques of the Immaculate Order and the Immaculate Philosophy as they understand it, and these two are now starting to squabble between themselves, and their dragon-blooded retainers, basically, that have grown up around them is basically that small community.
Freshly given side quest.
Yeah, if you're looking at what to do with them in-game, then yes, it's kind of, can you hold this place together, would be a story arc.
Or alternatively, as a realm group, can you tear this thing apart?
Yes, or correct their ways in any way, shape or form.
That sort of thing.
And now we move on to the Seven Storms Brotherhood.
These guys, they're... if you ask them, they tell you a Robin Hood story. They hang around, I want to say, Lake Macrata, I think it's called. It's near the Dreaming Sea, if memory serves. And, yeah, they see themselves as kind of Robin Hood-style bandits. Everyone else sees them as just the regular kind of bandits. And the way that they set off in my head is to be used as potentially either the standard villain group for a game, or flip side, to do the whole, ooh, but won't you join us? We can take from the rich, give to the poor whole bit. Although, in practice, they don't do much of the giving to the poor.
Yeah, that's fair enough. They've not got the best of reputations. Basically, what all of these smaller ones are functioning as is I kind of read them as examples of how kind of short-lived dragon-blooded societies can sort of spring up and operate, and either go on to be something else. The Forest Witches kind of strikes me as this sort of thing that...
We haven't talked about them yet.
I basically read the Forest Witches, which we'll get to in a bit, because we've saved some of the weird ones till last, as things like these small societies that have kind of grown and spread in their own way. I also take the ones that we've just gone over, just everything after Lookshy, almost as kind of inspiration for how a circle could be. Like, if you want to have a game where you are the Wanasan, or you are running the grass spiders, I think that's perfectly doable as a story as well. And there will be dozens of these little dragon-blooded centric societies doing weird things throughout creation.
Yeah, and then finally, after having done the big ones and the little ones that either are going to be omnipresent in your story or can be a little side quest, we have the three groups that kind of didn't fit. The ones that are strange and kind of really need... Again, this isn't the storyteller side of the game, but these are the ones that you kind of need to build a whole game around if you're going to use them at all, because they're kind of peculiar.
Yes, and we'll kind of touch on them here. We'll go into them in more depth when we do the locations that they're tied to, because they're quite geographically tied. I mean, you can kind of pass over the other ones and say, oh, they're in X direction, but these guys all have very, very specific places and are of a place. The first place that we're going to
is heaven.
Is heaven, yes.
Heaven's Dragons isn't a society, is the first thing to say. All these other ones are actually discrete enough groups with a power structure and a single boss. Heaven's Dragons is really an external label just given to all the Dragonbloods who happen to be in heaven for one reason or another. And these guys are perhaps one of the most interesting premises for a Dragon-blooded game that I have ever seen, is just being some of these guys, because Heaven's Dragons tend to behave... We spoke earlier about what the Dragonbloods were designed to do, and how that sort of changed across the distance and all that. Heaven's Dragons are the only ones that still stick to the original God-given blueprint completely. They are up there in heaven, they are nowhere near the top dogs, but they are beat cops, basically. They got lots of other roles, but the standard Heaven's Dragon is a beat cop.
Possibly. I would actually argue that they're really not intended to be there at all, because they have quite a precarious existence. They kind of live in enclaves in the slums in heaven, and basically have to fend off all the unemployed gods that try to prey on them.
And that's a sentence and a half to sum up Exalted.
Yeah.
Here we are in heaven's slums, batting off the unemployed gods.
Yeah, but the Heaven's Dragons are basically there to serve gods and perform roles that outsiders do better than anyone else in the perfected hierarchy. So if you've got a job that's too mucky for a god or a sidereal, or you don't want to get back to you, then you get Heaven's Dragons on board. They can give you plausible deniability.
Yeah, they're interesting because they're in heaven, and because getting to heaven is... Despite how in gameplay it's not actually that hard, is lore-wise considered to be quite tricky. They don't really have much to say or do with the ones downstairs. And likewise, if the ones on creation even know Heaven's Dragons exist, they'll only have a loose sort of idea of, oh, that's cool.
Yeah, they have their own lineages and so on as to how they operate, and they will also tend to operate kind of hereditary professions. Because gods don't die, they will basically quite often say, well, any given god will need to think, oh, I need to go to X family to get Y job done. If they want a particular thing done, they'll go to a lineage rather than an individual. And so it's a point of pride that a particular line of Heaven's Dragons can say they've been serving a particular god for however many generations. And they can also potentially... One of the other features with this is you get Dragonbloods mixing with gods and getting god-blooded and producing semi-divine offspring, which they will then use to kind of wheedle favours out of their divine patrons. The interactions between gods and Dragonbloods, it totally inverts how Dragonbloods associate with creation.
Yeah, in creation they are the ruling class. Here they very much are not. But... with all that being said, I'll tell you an awful and amazing idea that just popped into my head.
Go on.
Heaven's Dragons Mafia game.
Yes, I can totally see that. Yeah.
That's on the list.
Yeah. Yes, you can absolutely do that. My family have provided the best, I want to say olive oil or something dense in Italian like that, but it's provided the best goods for generations, and they will fight and stab and kill to protect their reputation in that area.
You come to me and disrespect me on the day of my daughter's exaltation.
Oh no. Yes, that will absolutely work. Oh.
Still,
yes.
Next off the list, now that we've got that hilarious idea, I'm going to jump a bit and say we do Prasad next, because our last option are the strangest by far.
Yep, let's do Prasad then. If you want anywhere that totally takes everyone out of their general role-playing comfort zone, go for Prasad, because it is basically the Empires of India as a dragon-blooded setting.
Yeah.
We'll cover it in a bit more detail in an episode on Prasad itself and go into a bit more detail, but they have a very, very different way of looking at the world because of how that particular real-world culture has been used as a source of inspiration.
Yeah, it's equally... You say Empires of India, I'd rather say it's... Again, it's a bit wonky to analogize the realm to the British Empire, but it's a lot easier to analogize Prasad to the Raj, in that it is nominally a part of the realm. And it nominally just hasn't paid taxes in a very long time, because it's far away enough that it's functionally independent but doesn't want the struggle of an independence war.
Yes. And there are ties to the realm to a degree, most of which are theological arguments, because Prasad has its ruling class of dragon-blooded and a very rigid caste system, but it's also based on the idea that the dragon-blooded are gods. The Immaculate Philosophy and the Immaculate Faith are predicated on the idea that the dragon-blooded are the most blessed and most perfect kind of mortal, but they are not to be worshipped directly. Prasad has a society where the dragon-blooded are worshipped directly, and everything sort of flows from that. They have interactions with the realm where basically the realm occasionally will send a bunch of immaculate monks over and they'll have kung fu theological duels.
Yeah.
And various squabbles. Yeah.
Yeah, equally as well. This is the fun bit that I like that's a lot less serious with it. Prasad is constantly sort of described as just a desirable holiday destination for lots of young dynasts who kind of want to live the good life. House Sinus especially. We'll get to them, but they will send people over there just so that somehow Sinus Dynast, who's only freshly exalted, can go over to the nice city and be worshipped for a couple of weeks before they go home and do some work.
Yeah, and it will just be a very, very nice break from everything. I do also remember seeing something about Prasad being a good place for war tourism.
Yeah, because it's on the Dreaming Sea, which is basically the Med. Like, the Inland Sea actually functions as that sort of thing, but in terms of how it behaves, this is a Bronze Age setting. The Dreaming Sea acts like the Med did back then, where there's never any peace anywhere on it, because everyone who borders it is actually quite advanced.
Yeah, that's true. There is so much stuff and so much wonky stuff going on there.
If we ignore the scavenger lands, the Dreaming Sea is the other standard setting.
Despite the fact that it's entirely new to 3rd edition, and at the moment we don't have a whole heap of information on it.
But that's what it's clearly going for, like to scavenger lands too.
Yeah, that's fair enough. And we will get to that when we have more material and for a more specific episode, by which time hopefully Across the 8 Directions will be out. So.
And most of the things we've said here will have been proven wrong.
Oh, entirely. Yeah.
The final and strangest Dragonblood group by far are the Forest Witches. And, dear listener, I'm going to lift the veil of podcasting for a second, because when we were doing the research for this episode, I initially thought, oh, the Forest Witches are quite cool, nice little thing. For some reason, I thought they were exclusive to 3rd. And I thought what we had on them in 3rd was all we had. I'm like, that's a cool little thing, lots of little mysteries. Then we went down the rabbit hole.
And yeah, well, in fairness, they're pretty consistent between 1st and 2nd. It's one of those cases where you can see that they kind of copy-pasted from 1st edition into 2nd edition. And also, in fairness, into 3rd. They're one of the most consistent groups.
Yeah. They're consistently weird.
Yeah, they have... Basically, the Forest Witches are a society of dragon-blooded based on the idea of extending a web of virtual reality across creation that was accidentally created when an awful lot of dragon-blooded died in one place. That's my one-sentence rundown.
It's a little bit The Ring, a little bit The Matrix, a little bit all of that, a little bit fairy lore.
Yeah.
Like, it's weird. I would argue they're more fairy than the fair folk are.
Yeah, in terms of the feel of the stories, absolutely. Just because of the kind of the weirdness of the interactions. We'll cover the Forest Witches in their own episode, I think, because they're just too good a thing to pass up.
Yeah, they're too good, they're too weird. What I will say is the only reason we're bringing them up here is in our storyteller section, where we both come up with plots for games for you all to take. Mine's entirely based around these mad little Peter Pan people.
Yes. In terms of what they are as dragon-blooded, the inciting incident was a first-era Solar artistically dismembering a particular aide of theirs, who then came to haunt the area as a semi-embodied spirit of the place. And various others did that. The connection to the dragon-blooded is that most of the society is based on the descendants of a dragon-blooded heresy. There was a particular dragon-blooded claiming to be Mela reborn, who basically fled into the forest of the east, and they then started saying, oh, we're going to be the heralds of a new creation.
Yeah.
So they're another immaculate philosophy offshoot in how weird things get. Although while Prasad is a philosophical spin on what dragon-blooded can be, the Forest Witches
are a mystical one.
Yeah, they're very much a mystical, metaphysical take on how the dragon-blooded ideas of dominance can differ.
Equally, in power level, it's really hard to place them as well, just because it mentions that, like, the amount of territory that they have, no one knows exactly for sure, because, like I said with fairy lore, people go into their forest, they don't come out, so the borders are quite hard to sort of place. Some people do, but yeah, not enough to learn where the borders. But they've got 5 manses, which, that's not a small thing. Even if they're little manses, having 5 manses, that's more than, like, most cities.
Yep. And bearing in mind that although these aren't manses that the witches have constructed themselves, this is one of the areas where the editions do differ a bit, is that they've got a set of dragonbloods who will guard the manses, but they don't really do much else to maintain them, because there are some hints that if the manses are fully operational, they actually go against what the witches are trying to do.
Yeah, like they're trying to keep them turned off.
Basically.
When we mentioned virtual reality, they've got this whole thing called the Sea of Mind, which has a whole city in it that they call Absolute Eternal. Lots of terminology, lots of weird. They'll get their own episode. But they are basically trying to spread their dream reality out across the world, and they can step between the two, is the reasoning for it. They also believe it'll make the world ideal because it's a dreaming thing. And for those of you lore hounds listening to this, because, I don't know, you already knew the lore, but you just like the sound of our voices, I'm pinning down now, I think it's communion.
Ooh.
I think the Forest Witches are unwittingly worshipping communion.
Ooh.
Because this is exactly what communion did.
I'm saying nothing. We need to save this for a Forest Witches episode. Yeah. We really do.
we leave this.
And finally, before we get into a bit of dragon-blooded history that we sort of talked around but not really got into, I wanted to discuss whether or not dragon-blooded are the bad guys. Because your Solar Exalted are your sensible protagonists for the Exalted game, and the dragon-blooded are the rulers that you're generally rebelling against.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting, because you'd think, my beef with Sidereals being well known, you'd think that'd extend to the dragons, but it doesn't. Partially because they were stooges.
Maybe, but yes.
Just by numbers, there's no way that the Sids could have fully informed all of them, so at least a majority of them just went along because they were told.
Yep.
Partially because of that, but partially because I see the Solars and the Dragons as arguably the two heroic factions. The Lunars I put as very grey, because They eat people. But the Solars and the Dragons are two very different kinds of heroic. The Solars are a high fantasy hero, basically, that have come into this otherwise quite grim-looking world. The Dragons are low fantasy heroes coming into this rather grim-looking world. Not in terms of power levels, but in terms of tone. They're not here to make everything amazing and perfect and sunshine and rainbows, which a lot of Solars think they can do and might be right. But the Dragons are here because, look, we've got the structure here. It's not perfect, but it's better than chaos that comes if it's gone. We will keep this going. We will fight for what we are assuming is honor, what we are assuming is decency. We're not going to overthrow the whole world. That's too risky, too dangerous. We protect us and ours.
Yes. And that's also a very, very good just premise to think about how a Dragon-Blooded game should go. It keeps it small, and you don't need any grand, overarching storyline to go with that, which is really, really nice.
A Dragon-Blooded game can be just trying to deal with one guy who is being troublesome.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think I'd say that the bad guys in the Exalted game are the systems. And generally speaking, those systems are propped up by Dragon-Blooded. So they are complicit.
Yeah, it's the thing of, and again, Third doesn't like this, and it's shooting the idea of Dragonbloods are also good guys in the foot by not liking it. They're the foot soldiers, not the commanders. They made the architecture of the realm, but not the idea of it. And it's the thing of, if you have to divide, and you can broadly divide, of the good guy exalts, the four of them anyway, the Solars, Lunas, Dragons, and Sids, because all of the other ones are variations on baddies, or are new. The Dragons are very much the foot soldiers. They might have made the realm, they didn't make the idea. They didn't design any of the systems that are the problem here. The Sids made all of these things. They don't actually do much to actively uphold them, but they're the ones who put this plan into motion, and they're the ones who should have been smart enough to know what it would do.
True enough. Now I think we're now getting to the point where I'm about to start trying to argue for individual agency in setting this stuff up rather than factions.
Oh yeah,
because you can hang a heck of a lot of it on Ketchup Carjack, on Chejop Kajak is the proper name.
Oh yeah, yeah. You can absolutely hang most of it on his neck, but it's the sort of thing of the realm is an empire. Let's line it two empires. You don't blame the average soldier of an empire for the empire's ills. You blame the emperor.
Okay, so question then: would you be happy if the creation-spanning shogunate had just carried on?
I don't think it could have, honestly. Even if they did, it would have been one of those things that fell apart under its own weight. I'm a flagrant look-shy fanboy, but I don't think it's actually sustainable on a large scale. I think the reason look-shy is so good is that it's given itself a small scale to work on. But I will argue that the shogunate was better than the realm, but the shogunate was also much unluckier than the realm. Because the shogunate at least tried to be meritocratic. You see that in Look-Shy as well. It has the, Dragonbloods are above the mortals, but when you are judging people by what they can do for you, a Dragonblood is above a mortal.
Yes. And I think as we're now kind of verging into questions of history, we should probably get to talking about the history of the Dragon-Blooded insofar as we can talk about it as a unified front. Because we're kind of nudging up against the stuff that the Dragon-Blooded shogunate did, so we should probably talk about the Divine Revolution and so on.
So yes, back in the mists of time, when the world was young and the gods were angry, Luna's girlfriend tried to make some exaltations. That's the reason, by the way, since we kind of dodged around it when we mentioned it earlier, that's the reason Gaia sided with the gods. It was no great affection for their cause, it was a great affection for Luna.
Yes.
Because the Unconquered Sun straight up told Luna, look, we're gonna kill her unless she's joining with us, get her to join. And Luna did. But when they were all making their exalts, the Unconquered Sun made a Solar, all was good. Luna made a Luna, all was good. The Maidens made Sids, all was good for then. Gaia tried to do it, and the human basically exploded. And so the idea came up, as we mentioned earlier, of she needs to split her power into 5. The 5 elements, the 5 poles. So she would give a human a fifth of the power.
Yes.
And a human could take that. And a Dragonblood happened. And she made a lot of them. And they, as we sort of said, served as, depending on your edition, the foot soldiers or the officers in the Divine Revolution, helped kill the primordials. All was good. Then came the First Age, which, for the Solars and the Lunas, was a wonderful time, pretty much. For the Dragons, it's a bit more middling.
Yeah, they kind of got the short end of the sticks. They weren't allowed to do anything much.
Yeah. They weren't mortals. They were still privileged beyond compare compared to a mortal. And they did still get to enjoy the fruits of solar labor like everyone else did, and live that land of paradise, but they didn't have as much influence as the Solars, though no one had as much influence as the Solars. What's weird is that they had about as much political influence as the Lunars did. The deliberative had two houses. The upper house was just for Solars, because Solars is the bosses. The sun said so. The lower house was everyone else. Mortals, dragons, Lunars, all of them were in equal footing there. And the dragons did, credit to them, get quite a few seats. And do all of their political agendas. Probably mostly fire aspects. That's what the deliberative is these days. But a lot of them would be military. The more things change, the more things stay the same. They would be attached to, usually to solars or to cities, rather than built up as whole legions. So there wouldn't be an 8th legion of 20 billion Dragonbloods. There would be Solar Jeff's guys who, when Solar Jeff needed that particular fairy that was trying to encroach on his garden knocked over, he'd send the dragons off to go and do it.
And then the usurpation happened, basically.
And I get my tinfoil hat on and start crying about sidereals.
Yes. Yes, because the sidereals started whispering into dragon-blooded ears that wouldn't it be better without all of the Solars? You could be ruling all of this. And so they were either brought on board as saying, yes, you need to kill everyone in order to rule. There's questions of how much your average dragon-blooded on the street, so to speak, knew about that side of it.
The usurpation was, importantly, very coordinated. Like, the majority of Solars and Lunars were killed in one evening.
Yes, because you can't have them reincarnating and warning people.
Yeah, and also, if it becomes a protracted war, that's when there are that many of them around, it's not when you can win.
No.
But if you deal one decisive strike, you can. But this is the sort of reason of why I lean towards the dragons being unwitting stooges, because I kind of see an Execute Order 66 scenario going down. Not necessarily the hypnotic command bit, but just the order is go in, kill, and most of the soldiery don't have a clue why, but they know, yep, okay, this is the job, chunk.
Yeah, and if they've only got one piece in a much broader puzzle, then it's much, much easier to give those orders. If it's, oh, go and kill this general who you were probably going to go to war against anyway at some point, then it all makes total sense.
Yeah. Equally as well, though, to give them credit, there are probably at least one Dragonblood somewhere who actually had something resembling the full picture of the Solars have to die, not so you can be in charge, but so that they don't break everything. Because late first stage Solars were not a pretty thing to look at.
No, there's basically the late first stage Solars are painted as having all of the excesses of Empire plus magic and technology on their side. And when you factor in the Great Curse, basically systems that lean on all-powerful beings for their function, having those all-powerful beings breaking down, having tantrums, using them in entirely irrational and untargeted ways. Yeah, you'll end up with a lot of people dying and basically things kind of hanging by a thread in some cases, as the technology that maintains particular areas of the world is dependent on someone not having a tantrum that day.
Yeah, we mentioned earlier in the Forest Witches segment that whole saga was started by a Solar dismembering a servant for a lesson about gardening. That was late first stage Solars.
Yeah, they were not pleasant people by the end of it.
There would be some dragons that genuinely believed in the mission, but I lean towards the majority of them didn't fully know what they were doing until it was already quite going along.
Yeah, and there were a fair few Dragon-blooded that were cut down with their masters.
Yes, that's the thing. There were some Dragonbloods, the ones that we call the good boys, who stayed loyal and fought against their Dragon-blooded kin to defend their Solar masters.
Yes. And out of the ashes of that, you get the Dragon-blooded Shogunate, which was basically a creation-spanning empire ruled by a military leader that was trying desperately to maintain a creaking first-age infrastructure with all that mystical stuff that was holding up the corners of the world, without necessarily the full power to be able to do it.
And while also still fighting off the remnants of the Solars, there were still more of them then than there are at current day, and the Lunars, and dealing with the fact that across the Shogunate's course, everything that could possibly go wrong did.
Pretty much. It was factious because you don't have someone who is entirely above everyone else in terms of capability of any given second. There were no end of squabbles about who got to be shogun, and stuff broke down in that way. This is also the point where the Immaculate Philosophy gets born, or the Immaculate something, because the Immaculate Philosophy is connected to the Immaculate Order, the Immaculate Religion as a whole.
This is the point where the Immaculates get released.
The point where people start talking about the Dragon-Blooded as the top of creation's pyramid, so to speak.
It's important to note that it is mentioned in at least some second edition texts that it was a small regional cult in some places, even just before the usurpation happened. There were Immaculates of a kind. They did still say that, it's SIDS and this is groundwork, but this wasn't suddenly, we've taken over and it's this. There was some level of continuity that the populace could have seen. This religion that we thought was a bit weird 20 years ago is now everywhere. But the thing with the Shogunate, despite all of this horrible, horrible things, this is the golden age that most of the modern Dragonbloods look back to and say, we want to be like that. Because whilst, yes, things were going badly, it was, for use of a better term, it's kind of like the Dark Ages are for Britain these days, where it's like, yeah, things were bad, but it was an age of honour and chivalry and prowess.
And surprisingly advanced societies, just when we actually look at it. Yes.
Yeah, and despite everything going wrong, the Shogunate did still have some feats of military prowess that would be inconceivable today.
Yes.
Like, they declared war against the Lunars. Not a Lunar, not even a pack of Lunars, but all of them. And they won. Older editions imply the Sidereals were helping them, because that's why the Lunars ran out into the wild places so that the Sids couldn't see them. But even with that help, there's only so much that tactics and strategy will get you when you're fighting someone who can turn into an elephant. It's still a very impressive military feat, is the point.
Yes, and then the Great Contagion happened. A thing cooked up by a Death Lord to wipe out all life on creation.
With the help of hell.
Yes. Except that it did not wipe out all life on creation. It only wiped out about 9/10 of it.
Only.
Yeah. Yeah, what can I say? We're British, we're allowed some understatement.
And then the fairies attack.
Yeah, the immediate impact of all that is that the Shogunate's manpower gets significantly reduced. So any kind of military adventurism is not going to happen, or any kind of defense against the what's called the Balorian Crusade, when the fair folk decide to invade the realm. And
this destroyed everything. It's the reason that creation at current day is a mess. It's the reason that there are entire swaths of land, pretty far inland, that are just wild. It's the reason that there's so many Death Lords and Shadowlands and all of these funny things. And it ends with, like we said earlier, the Scarlet Empress wandering into the Imperial Manse and hitting the big red button. The funny thing about this is that both the Fair Folk and the Death Lords and Hell all considered this a failure.
Yes, because they didn't wipe everything out.
Yeah, they only completely destroyed a civilization and made it to the point that the world regressed centuries. In fact, no, the world regressed to further back than it had ever been.
Yes. And also got a lot smaller because all of the technologies keeping the wild back weren't able to be maintained, so the borders of the wild close in. So as big as creation is, as much as creation is bigger than the world in terms of sheer scale when you look at any of the maps, it was bigger. So there is that. And after that point, everything kind of fractures. The Dragon-Blooded Companion book is called Heirs to the Shogunate, because pretty much every consequential Dragon-Blooded society is a remnant of something that happened during the Shogunate era.
Yeah, it's when we say that Exalted is a post-apocalyptic game, like we did in our solar episode, this is the apocalypse.
Yes. And then it all gets into realm history, pretty much. Whereas the Shogunate tried to do direct rule by Dragon-Blooded, the realm does indirect rule by Dragon-Blooded for the most part, which is frankly a bit more of a sensible way to do it, but it's also less effectual.
It's interesting because despite the differences between the realm and Luxshai that we've sort of mentioned before, where Luxshai is very, very Greek and very, very Minas Tirith and all these things, it does still come down to the naming of the shogunate, and by extent Luxshai, tries to rule an empire like Japan did. The realm does it like China did.
Yes, and those differences are huge. And I think we should probably leave off on the history there and just go through some examples of some famous dragon-blooded who exemplify what dragon-blooded are, pretty much.
Yeah. This is the awkward thing where we can't go into most of them too much because they all come up in another episode because dragon-bloods are tied to place so strongly.
Yes. First of all, the Scarlet Empress, she was a shogunate officer. She had ties to agens of some sort, and she held up creation through the force of her personality and the realm defense grid. The whole thing of the realm is based around her. We'll go into quite how that works next time, because next time is the realm episode.
The answer is, in brief, it didn't really.
Yeah.
It was very much held up by force of will, and the structure couldn't exist without her actively holding it.
No, that's absolutely true. Previous editions have tried to give kind of reasons for her doing the things that she did and humanize her a little bit. Third has kind of made her a bit of a distant figure. But if you look into the stuff that Second says about how it's all structured, then everything has a reason for what the Empress did. She's basically one of the greatest politicians that creation has ever known.
Yeah, Second broadly says that she deliberately designed the realm not to work at all without her, so that she was irreplaceable.
Yes, she structured the realm to protect herself first and foremost.
And it's really interesting because she was a very, very Roman empress in basically everything she did. But yeah, after that we have a couple of her children one of her children and one of her grandchildren who are they're not the only big celebrities in the realm. The realm has a lot of big figures, but that'll be in the realm's episode. We've mentioned Nemon before, and we'll touch on her a little bit more now.
Yes. Nemon is the eldest of the Scarlet Empress's remaining children, and is again one of those who is entirely defying the usual dragon-blooded only live for about 300 years thing. The Scarlet Empress was ruling for thousands of years. Nemon is somewhere in the region of about 600, 700 or so.
I think, yeah, she is pushing towards closer to the big 4 digits.
Yeah, and she is showing no signs of slowing down. She is one of a particular product of the way that the Empress's family worked, and one of the few survivors of her brother being entirely sibling-sidal. I don't know what the word is for when the gender...
Fratricidal and fratricidal and soricidal. I don't think there's a generic one because Latin didn't have a generic one.
No, that's fair enough. Rhaegar just wanted to kind of nix the whole idea of succession in the bud by making sure the Empress only had one successor.
Him.
Yes. And then the Empress eventually said, here's your little sister Nemon. If she dies, so do you. And Rhaegar absolutely hated Nemon for that. Until that arrangement happened, she was sequestered in the Immaculate Order. So she got brought up in her early years very, very heavily in the Immaculate Faith. So House Nemon is quite heavily linked in with the Immaculate Order. It's famed for building projects and so on, and temples is one of the most consistent things that it's built.
Yeah, Nemon as well, just by her age. It's weird because she pairs quite nicely with one of her siblings in pretty much every way, that being Ladal.
Yes.
Because she is a zealot. Ladal is also a zealot. I won't talk about Ladal now, they're a whole different kettle of fish, but she is also quite famous because she knows things.
Yes.
She's very, very, very clever. I think there's some things rattling around in second edition claiming that she's the most intelligent living person on creation now.
It wouldn't surprise me. She's also a magnificent sorceress. She is the obvious successor to the Scarlet Empress. The Scarlet Empress has disappeared 5 years before current date setting-wise. No one quite knows why, unless you get into certain bits of second edition, which we won't now. So there's the question of who's going to succeed the Empress is a big thing in the current setting for Exalted, and Namon is the most obvious candidate.
Yeah, to stop the realm falling apart, I have to mention this, even though it'll be mentioned in detail in the realm episode. I have to do it just so we get to say his name. To stop the realm from falling apart, all of the houses did agree to put a regent on the throne, the wonderfully named Tepet Fakuf.
Yes, and I've tried to investigate this, and there is actually no way of saying this without sounding like you're swearing. So, yeah.
I choose to believe it's deliberate.
Absolutely, it's deliberate.
He's completely ineffectual.
Yes.
But on the matter of other heirs to the Empress, Nemon's the obvious one. She's not the only claimant. There are lots of other claimants, but one of them's cooler than all the others, and that is one of her granddaughters, Tepetejava, otherwise known as the Rose Black, who is the most... She wins the award, and it's a really contentiously and hotly contested award, but she is the most anime character in Exalted.
Yes. If you actually want an invincible sword princess, Tepetejava is your one. She is pretty much the salvation of the house, because House Tepet is not doing well, but she has taken the Red Piss Legion, I can't remember what the official number is, which was basically a whole bunch of conscripts, layabouts, drunks, all the rest of it, and just hammered it into an effective fighting force. And they are famed not only for being infamous drunkards and all the rest of it, but actually for doing pretty well under Tepetejava, and they're pretty much the only remaining Tepet military force out there after the farce with the Bull in the North.
And she has a really striking visual design as well, which is impressive because, weirdly, for a game with such evocative writing and descriptions as Exalted, in terms of visual art, there are very, very few really amazingly striking designs that stick with you. Tepetejava is one of them. Proper all green armor with thorns all over it, a crazy looking anime sword, bright red hair. She is the absolute sword princess. And I'll say this now, just to set people off and make them angry. She is not the only morally good person in the realm, but the only morally good person in the realm with an actual relevant amount of power.
She's one of the few that you can kind of argue is fighting for house and realm, and not just for naked political power. You kind of get the sense that House Tepet is coming first for Tepetejava, but it won't be the sense of House Tepet will survive while the realm burns, which you get from a lot of the other characters.
She is also just kind of, in so many ways, flagrantly heroic. We loosely mentioned, and we won't go into detail of them until the realm episode, but 2nd edition had pre-written adventures in the weird experiment that, because 2nd edition had pre-written adventures, we've never seen since. But that is entirely where all of the love for Tepetejava comes from, because it's where most of her character was done.
Yes. And it's just really, really nicely fleshed out, and because it's the person you're interacting with the most for direction in quite a few of those, if I remember correctly.
Well, it depends on which side you pick.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, we will drop the curtain here for those of you who don't want to run games, even though we've given storytellers tips throughout here as an elaborate ploy to make you listen to more of our content.
Yes, this is it for the flavour portion of the Wondrous Atlas Creations Destiny, and it's also the end for our first season. Just to kind of set the scene with how we're going to be structuring the podcast running forward, we've outlined the first 3 main Exalt types, so if you're new to the setting, you're not going to be completely alien to some of the concepts that are coming up as we go into other bits. But now we're going to shift gears to, instead of talking about broad concepts and Exalt types, we are going to be talking about locations from here on out. So the next episode will be the start of the season of the Realm and the Blessed Isle. I think probably the Blessed Isle is probably the safest thing, because that's going to be where we're going into the most detail location-wise. Next episode, we will talk about the Realm as an overarching political structure and how the realm functions. And then we'll go into specific places on the Blessed Isle, what's funky about each of them, what's interesting, how they work and where they fit in, who's important in each of those regions, that sort of thing.
And likewise, the houses will get their detailed fit when we cover their places.
Yes, absolutely.
Plus the one extra house who we may just do at the end because they don't really have territory.
Yeah, I was going to say that that one is going to have to be an odd one out. That'll also happen when we go a bit more broadly, that those of you who know the Exalted setting already will know that we've only touched on 3 Exalt types, and there are more. But the other ones we will go over in a bit more detail when we cover Yushan and Malpheus and all of the other places that are a bit more tied to those Exalt types.
Yeah, the Underworld, and for the newer 2, scavenger lands for exigence and liminals when we figure out that we actually have something to say about liminals.
Pretty much, yes. In the meantime, please do drop us an email at wondrousatlas@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at Wondrous Atlas. Do follow us. And if you've enjoyed our content, please do drop us a review wherever you're listening. We'd absolutely love to hear from you guys. And we will join you next time when we crack open the Wondrous Atlas of Creation's Destiny to discuss the realm. Catch you later. Thank you for listening to the Wondrous Atlas of Creation's Destiny, an Exalted podcast presented by Aramithius and Rails. Check out the show notes and story seeds from this episode at wondrousatlas.wordpress.com, and if you have any questions, drop us an email at wondrousatlas@gmail.com. The opening music for this podcast is Travel into the Blessed Isle by James Semple, and the closing music is Exploring Creation, also by James Semple. Both tracks are taken from the album Exalted, Dreams of the Second Age, and are property of Onyx Path Publishing, used with permission.
And you are now into the errata for the Dragon-Blooded Lore episode. We've had some notes from Black, so thank you very much for those, Black. And just a little few things to tweak from the episode that we either got wrong or need to go into a little bit more detail on to clarify.
Yeah, we start here with a little bit about Gaia and her relationship to the Dragonbloods. The elemental dragons, the Dragonbloods, and Gaia, their relationship is admittedly a vague one. And in the episode, I presented a relatively clean story for you, that a human could not handle all of a primordial's power, split her power into the 5 dragons, they create the terrestrial exaltation, it then transmits by the blood as normal. We've had some critiques saying that that sounds like fanon. It is and it isn't, depending specifically on what you think about one series of publications from 2nd edition. Because what I presented there is based on a handful of throwaway lines, effectively. In the Autochthonia books, I believe briefly in 1st, but mostly in 2nd, it mentions the fact that Gaia and the elemental dragons work like any primordial with souls and subsouls. It's not gone into much detail there, but it's key to note that Gaia is a primordial, not a god. Primordials don't have children that are gods. Gods were custom built for a specific thing. And so the dragons, their relation to her as subsouls is like any top-level demon. The thing about the splitting the power comes from the ink monkeys, which, mentioning that, will have probably made about 1 out of 10 listeners go, oh, here we go, and the rest of you go, what on earth is an ink monkeys? They were a collection of small essays, errata, and other twiddly bits, effectively. I think that's the most specific term I can put for them, because they had loads of things in, that were put out at the end of 2nd edition by a bunch of the writers. I think just because they'd stopped making 2nd edition material, but they had some stuff they wanted to go for. I haven't really ever found any why Ink Monkeys had to happen material anywhere. But it does lots of things. It does some mechanics, whatever. It's the reason that 2.5 is referred to as a thing for Exalted when you're running 2nd edition rather than 2nd, because the Ink Monkeys errata mechanically are massive. But it also did a lot of lore things, including that story in the Magnus Speaks articles in the Ink Monkeys. That's where that story is told. Now, how canon the Ink Monkeys are is a hot topic. I tend to treat them as canon because it's made by the same people, even if it's not put out in the same format. But, yeah. You can treat the elemental dragons as... well, I wouldn't say you can treat them as gods. Nothing indicates that they're gods. But you can treat them as big elementals. You can get rid of the splitting story if you want. You can get rid of any connection to Gaia if you really want to be nuts. And say that it's all ambiguous.
Yeah, and there's not really a huge amount of direction with the case of the elemental dragons anyway, because the dragons don't speak to their children, and it's all just a process. So it doesn't really matter too much in the grand scheme of things where all this stuff comes from or how it relates. So make of it what you will, I think, is the key message there.
Yes. Also, a naming thing. The Sextus Gilus, Heshiash, and the gang, the Immaculate Dragons, weren't called that until 2nd edition. That was just the name for the elemental ones. Then 2nd edition had a book where it was the Immaculate ones, or maybe it's back to front. It was in the Compass of Terrestrial Directions, The Wild, which tells you how accurate that entire section could be. Basically, one book about the wild is the reason there's a naming question.
Yeah, but the idea of the dragons having names has just sort of stuck. I think that 3rd edition is a bit more definite in terms of linking them to the elemental side, and then conflating it with the Immaculate Dragons as well, while at the same time stating that the Immaculate Dragons and the Elemental Dragons are separate things. Because particularly Sextus Gilus has done a lot of very, very elemental dragon, elemental type things, while also being an Immaculate Dragon who is potentially a dragon-blooded in some way, shape or form. But it's all a bit messy.
As we'll get to in our Immaculate Order episode, this is a big mess, and arguably by design.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So yes.
Anyway, let's put that down and move on to something else.
Nemon. She's younger than we thought. We've done her a disservice. She's only about 399.
I think the key thing there is to say that we've been saying that she's kind of massively uncharacteristically old for a dragon-blooded. That is within the lifespan of a dragon-blooded. The difference is how she is presented within that, because she's presents as someone who is, generally speaking, well, 3rd edition says sort of in her mid-20s, basically. So this is someone absolutely sort of physical prime sort of thing, whereas a dragon-blooded who is almost 400 will not be that. The dragon-blooded in that will be old, but not absolutely on their last legs.
Although, we've also given a great bonus to someone else by making her sound a lot older, because Old Man Ragara is really old. He's pushing 600 and something. Where have we gone? 650? Yeah. Old Man Ragara is pushing 650, but he looks it.
Yes, and he's already done things to extend his life anyway. At least in 3rd, he's leeching off a particular artifact that is extending his life.
And somehow that's more ethical than how he did it in 2nd. Despite the fact that he has to recharge that artifact by implicitly torturing prisoners.
Yes, anyway, and for that one, listen to or watch the Ragara episode.
Right. The Great Curse. Now, we've had the errata critique that it has always been for all exalts, whereas I do in the episode try and go down the line of it's a solar thing. Yes, but my error here is not the error that the person pointing it out thinks it is. My error is in not explaining what I meant properly, because they correctly point out, after the Divine Revolution, the Exalted did get cursed. The Solars go nuts like that. The Lunars have their weird limit break and used to have Chimera stuff as well and a bunch of other weird things. The Sidereals have the Hubris Curse or the Cooperation Curse, depending on your edition and just who you're listening to. And the Dragonbloods are deliberately vague because they don't necessarily always have the same thing for the same reasons. But we'll pretend dragons don't exist so that this can be a clean statement. And yes, they are all cursed. The issue that I have that I was bad at raising is that 3rd tries to pretend they've all got the same curse. And mechanically, it makes them all have an identical curse. That you have the limit system. And when it breaks, you do go off and do something crazy and you lose control of your character for a bit. That wasn't the way it used to be. The curses used to be significantly different things. And they would have different effects. So the Sidereals, for example, we had the Cooperation Curse or the Hubris Curse, depending on how you go. I tend to run the Cooperation Curse because it explains the Bureau. The more Sidereals work together on something, the more fate conspires for it to go wrong for them. Whereas the Hubris Curse, I believe, is just a case of they get very, very arrogant. Which is more in line with 3rd edition, making them all the same. But yeah, they were different, distinct curses because they weren't treated as one entity by the Primordials. Though, as we mentioned in the errata of an earlier episode, surely with 3rd's changes, humans should be cursed as well. But yeah, there was a mistake there, but not necessarily in saying that everyone should have and always has had the same curse. They had different ones. Also, on the same topic, no one knows about the curse, other than potentially, in 2nd edition, Lytek, the god of exaltation. He's a whole kettle of fish. He'll get his own talk in a Yushan episode. Jupiter, the maiden of secrets. And though this one wasn't mentioned in the point given for the errata, so I can push my reading obscure books glasses up, Nara-O, the goddess of secrets known only but to one mortal.
And we're going to finally put the Great Curse bucket down now, because Arcane Fate by the Sidereals is from their own mucking around with various things. It's not a product of... yeah, with the mask, it's absolutely in 3rd edition. But we were
in 2nd as well.
Oh, and in 2nd, cool. But Arcane Fate, we mentioned, was a product of the Divine Curse. It's not.
Yeah, it's just worse than what their actual curse is.
Yes.
But yeah, just for reference there with it as well, when we're saying the mask, they hid themselves and their identities behind a constellation so that they could do covert ops. That's not even a facetious way of putting it.
That's also, as of 3rd edition, where they hid the Jade Prison.
Which makes later things that we're going to mention in different errata weirder and more impossible. But because in 2nd, it was under the sea somewhere.
We'll get to that. My memory is failing me, and we may have mentioned this, but we want to make it a bit more explicit. But various of the great houses were founded by adoptees of the Empress. It did not have to be her blood children to found houses. So houses Cathak, Iselsi, Ladal, Nellans, and Tepet were all founded by adoptees of the Empress. So the Great House is not necessarily as related to the Empress by blood as you might think.
Though Ladal is her granddaughter and she adopted her up into being a regular daughter for legal purposes, ?
Yeah, well, legal purposes and prestige. I mean, legal purposes and getting one up on one's own children are probably the same thing as regards to the Empress.
Never ever draw a family tree of the Empress. It will become the most unholy shape you could ever imagine.
Yes.
Very quickly.
Yes.
Especially if you consider the fact that she's arguably related to a primordial.
Anyway.
There's your hint to keep listening.
Let's move on from that one. Just a bit of terminology. We talk about satrapies, but I don't think we really explain them properly. Satrapies in the ancient world, which is where this is likely pulling from, comes from the Persian system, which is basically satraps were client kings of the King of Kings within the Persian Empire. That's not how it functions within the realm, so don't think that the satraps are rulers of the satrapies. They have a great deal of pull and a great deal of power, but their main concern is keeping order, making sure the Immaculate Faith is maintained or the Immaculate Philosophy is maintained, and that taxes go back. The satrapies have their own local government systems remaining intact. They are technically subservient to the satrapy system, but the satrapy system does not obviate all of their own laws. There is always 2 governments going on, and I don't think we really made that clear enough within the episode itself. Next point is on the Forest Witches, because it was a bit of a mess, frankly.
This is by design, in 2nd edition anyway. We have Word from Black, who tends to be quite good for such things, that the general intent with them in 2nd was that one of the authors wanted them to be incomprehensible and hard to get your head around on a meta level as well as in universe, and so that's why they are written like they are, which, okay, that explains it.
Yes, pretty much.
And he succeeded.
Yeah.
Amazingly.
And now we're going to talk about the Great Contagion a bit.
Yes. We received the errata point that Hell didn't have anything to do with the Great Contagion, that the Dowager, one of the Death Lords, was messing around in the Well of Udur, which caused it. Yes and no. Yes, that is true. Hell did not make the disease. If I said it did, that was a mistake. It was not uninvolved in the whole affair, though.
Yes, they're the whole reason that it's spread.
More than that, the reason that the contagion was kicked off, it was not random. It was not just let's kill 9 out of 10 people. This'll be fine. It was a cover-up for a heist. Because, in 2nd edition, it's tied to how Abyssals and Infernals started. When everyone, including the gods, was running around like headless chickens because everyone is dying everywhere, oh no. From basically the whole world ending for a few years there, demons had found where the Jade Prison was. Back in 2nd, it was under the sea. We'll get to why that's weird. And on calibration, while everyone was running around and no one was looking, even the sidereal guards for the Jade Prison, chink, they put a crack in it. And they stole. The number is changed from core book to core book even within 2nd. that they stole basically a handful of exaltations, and they got divvied up between the Death Lords who gave them to the Neverborn and made the first Abyssals, and the Yozi, who used the same concept and the same tech as the Neverborn, who'd figured out how to corrupt a solar to make Infernals. But basically, they ended the world to get their own solars. Hell was involved, basically. They weren't the ones doing it, but they were in no way uninvolved.
Yes. I'm not entirely sure that that's necessarily the case now, or I don't necessarily get why the Jade Prism would be broken into, and then all of a sudden you get a rush of new solars escaping centuries later. That's my concern. So I don't know whether that's even the case within 2nd edition, because even in 2nd edition, the solars returning is a very recent event.
Yes, but it's implied that basically what they did was not so much crack the main door open, but put a little chink in the side that they pulled a small number out of. Don't think of exaltation as fluid that will find any way out, but rather they had either wear and tear, or there's a trickle feed, or a bajillion different ways for why one tiny crack doesn't immediately break it.
And then all of a sudden it breaks properly later, and there's an outrush of exaltations
like a
later
teapot
on.
with 1,000 cracks that still makes good tea until the one day it doesn't.
Our final point for this set of errata is that we mentioned that the Scarlet Empress found out that Ragara was killing her children. We mentioned that this was a deal that was made at the point when Nimon was born. That's not the case. That was when Cessus was born, because Ragara did absolutely try and kill Nimon.
Several times,
and that's why she ran away and why she hates him. It's not the case that Ragara was tasked with protecting Nimon. That would make no sense otherwise. I don't know why that didn't occur to me during the episode. But it happened when Cessus was born. So, correction there. And with that, I think that wraps the errata for the Dragon-Blooded episode. I do hope things make a bit more sense now. Thank you, and goodbye.